There are several topics covered here. The most important concern the Spinoza's theory of the mind-body and his theory of knowledge, together with his theory of the emotions, which will be the subject of Book 3. These will form the basis for his ethical theory, which gets underway in Book 4. He starts off with some more metaphysics, the doctrine of the parallelism of the attributes, summarized in Proposition 7, which states that the order and connection of ideas is the same as the order and connection of things. He's saying that there's a one-to-one correspondence between the attributes of thought and the attribute of extension. In Book 2, he usually uses the word body or simply thing to refer to the modes in the attributes of extension, and he uses the word idea or modes of thinking to refer to modes in the attribute of thought. The doctrine of the parallelism is really just a restatement of the principle of sufficient reason. Remember that for Spinoza, it's axiomatic that for any thing or for any state of affairs, there is a sufficient reason or an adequate explanation for the existence of that thing, and that sufficient reason is the idea of the thing in the mind of God. So the parallelism between the two attributes, I think, is just a restatement of the principle of sufficient reason. This provides him with the metaphysical basis for his theory of how the human mind is related to the human body. The human mind is the idea in the mind of God whose object is the human body. So he elaborates this after an interlude on the physics of bodies as he understands it, in a long series of propositions concerning the workings of the human mind. Although in the mind of God, the human mind as the idea of the body is a perfect idea of the body. Within our own minds, our ideas are generally inadequate or confused. That word inadequate has a technical meaning. Generally, the words that I have put here in inverted commas, we need to pay close attention to their meaning when we encounter them in the course of working through Book 2. But the point I want to make here is that our own mind's ideas, both of our bodies and of external bodies, and in fact, our mind's ideas of themselves, are generally confused and inadequate. And the principal reason for this is because for Spinoza, the human mind only has access to the external world through the effects that bodies external to ourselves, through the effects that they have on our bodies. So when he says that the mind is the idea of the body, he literally understands that to mean that all that we have access to through our minds is the modifications of our bodies by things external to ourselves. So this leads him to classify most of our knowledge under the heading of imagination or knowledge of the first kind. It consists of pretty much everything, all of our cognition. If you look at the list of headings here, there's hearsay, opinion, sense perception, our knowledge of the duration of things, our memories, our anticipation of the future. All of these, in Spinoza's mind, are inadequate in the sense that if, to the extent that they are true, they are only true accidentally. There is no guarantee that our ideas which fall under these headings are necessarily true. The one thing I've left out there is a rather technical one. I noted that universals, such as man or dog, or the true, the good, and the beautiful, all of these for Spinoza are, in fact, confused ideas. This term universal, it's a reference to a medieval controversy between nominalism and realism. Spinoza sides with the nominalists and says that these universal terms are just, in fact, confused ideas, not not real in that sense. So we'll get to that in due course. The second heading, knowledge of the second kind, is what he calls reason. Has actually a very limited scope for Spinoza. It just consists in what things that can be deduced from the axioms in books 1 and 2 and the postulates of his physics, which he lays out in some supplementary material to Proposition 13. Then there is what he calls knowledge of the third kind, or intuitive knowledge, which is actually going to play a major role in Book 5. It's unfortunately, there's very little textual evidence available to us to enable us to divine exactly what he intended by this. So we may find that there are some controversies about what exactly he meant under this heading. And finally, the end of Book 2 is concerned with the denial of free will. Remember, in Book 1, he denies free will for God. Here, he denies free will for man. And there is a lengthy scholium that foreshadows the ethical theory which he is going to develop in the light of this denial. For Spinoza, ethics is a matter of intellectual understanding rather than something revolving around the traditional concept of freedom of the will. Good. Okay, so that's the overview for Book 2. It has to be admitted that this part is the most technically challenging. The good news is that once we get it out of the way, the rest of the ethics is relatively plain sailing. So what I'll do now is have a look at the definitions and axioms that start off Book 2. It's always very important with Spinoza to get a clear understanding of his terminology, which is typically rather idiosyncratic in the way he uses his terms. So here are the definitions that he gives at the beginning of book 2. The first 3 are quite straightforward. Just bear in mind that he typically uses the word body to refer to the modes under the attribute of extension. Sometimes he just uses the word thing, and he uses the word idea or mode of thinking to refer to the modes under the attribute of thought. He also, in definition 2, he has a definition of essence. Although he has been using the word essence throughout book 1, he only gives a definition here, but the definition is quite standard. It's the same as Aristotle's definition as the defining property of a thing. Here we have adequate idea. This is very important and quite tricky to get a clear idea of what he's talking about here. If you remember, in the definitions for book 1, he defines a true idea as one that corresponds with its object. So he seems to be subscribing to an ordinary conventional correspondence theory of truth. But in parallel with this, he's also developing a coherence theory. And that's what this term, adequate idea, refers to. I'm using this term coherence theory anachronistically because I think it was first introduced by the idealist F.H. Bradley, if I'm not mistaken. Bradley was an idealist, somebody who denied that the physical world was anything other than a mental creation. This certainly is not Spinoza's view, but I'm mentioning this because there's a sort of problem that idealists have in defining what they mean by the word true. If in fact the physical world does not exist in the conventional sense, then how can you determine whether a proposition about the physical world is true or false? The answer that Bradley proposed, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, is that an idea is true if it coheres with all of the other ideas that we have in our minds about the world. And then there's a job of work to be done to explain what that word coheres means. For Spinoza, the sense of coherence is just one of logical implication. So there are a few other passages in the ethics that shed light on his usage of this term adequate. In the first definition in book 3, he explains what an adequate cause is. A cause is adequate if the effect can be clearly and distinctly perceived through the cause. So this is the idea of an adequate explanation, as in the standard formulation of the principle of sufficient reason. The term clearly and distinctly, of course, comes from Descartes. And here, at the very outset of book 1, he explains that the knowledge of an effect depends on and involves the knowledge of its cause. So an idea, to say that an idea is adequate is not merely to say that it's true, because it implies understanding the reason for the idea. So uh, the adequacy of an idea in a given mind depends on the other ideas in the mind. And for Spinoza, it's quite possible that an idea can be true without being adequate. If, for example, take the fact that the angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. Most people remember this from school, but would be hard-pressed to explain why this should be the case. So in that situation, the idea would be true, but inadequate. It's just accidentally true, something that you happen to remember from school. So this term, adequate idea, is going to play a major role in what follows. The major ethical project for Spinoza is to attain to adequate ideas of our emotions. And when Spinoza talks about in Book 5, his doctrine of the eternity of the mind, for Spinoza, the eternal part of the mind is the part that consists of adequate ideas. Good. So for duration, he says it's an indefinite continuation of existing. One point that Spinoza is going to insist on a lot is that we're not in a position to have adequate ideas of the durations of things when things come into existence or go out of existence is inaccessible to us. He also has a definition. He says reality and perfection. He says he understands that they mean the same thing. I don't think we need to dwell on that any further at this stage. He uses the term singular things or particular things depending on the translation. This comes up quite a lot. As distinct from generalities or abstractions. And he explains that by a singular thing, he may, in some cases, refer to a complete state of affairs if it is attributable to a singular cause, rather than a particular object. I generally, following the convention of using italics for my own interjections. So I've added here a couple of definitions which Spinoza would have done well to include at this point, but didn't. He's going to use the term common notions to refer to what is common to all things, to all bodies, which are equally present in the part and in the whole. This is a reference to his physics, specifically the postulates of his physics, which he lays out after proposition 13. The term actually comes from Euclid. Euclid had 10 axioms, 5 of which he called postulates and 5 which he called common notions. According to lengthy analysis by Wolfson, Spinoza when he uses the term common notions, is referring explicitly to the postulates of his physics. We're also going to encounter the term intuitive knowledge, which he says it proceeds from an adequate knowledge of the formal essence of certain attributes of God and gives us access to knowledge of the essence of things. We'll come to that in due course towards the end of book 2. Okay, as for the axioms, well, the first one, we've already encountered this. The essence of man does not involve necessary existence. So we've already seen this. God's essence entails existence, but this is not the case for the finite modes, including, of course, individual human beings. Man thinks, okay, man is a mode of thinking. Here, the third axiom, I've highlighted this phrase here because it's an important foreshadowing of book 3, which is concerned exclusively with the affects or the emotions. The point he's making here is that he admits the existence of abstract ideas, okay, such as the ideas of mathematics. But for Spinoza, almost all of our ideas are effectively charged, okay? Love, desire, or whatever, okay, are all ideas with an effective charge. Eventually, for instance, volitions, okay, he would include here as being first and foremost ideas, and he's eventually going to say that will and intellect are one and the same thing. This is in anticipation of his denial of freedom of the will, which we'll come to at the end of book 2. We feel that a certain body is affected in many ways. I believe that the certain body that's being referred to here is the body which goes with a given human mind. And the fifth axiom, we neither feel nor perceive any singular things except bodies and modes of thinking. Those bodies, of course, are modes under the attribute of extension, and modes under the attribute of thinking are, well, usually referred to as ideas. Okay, so I'll wind up just by a brief survey of propositions 1 to 8 of book 2. There's very little new here. In fact, he's covering pretty much the same ground as in the first 10 propositions of book 1. Remember, the way things get underway in book 1 is that proposition 11 is the proof of the existence of God as Spinoza defines it. And the first 10 propositions are devoted to dismantling Cartesian substance dualism, the traditional idea of God as a thinking thing being one substance under the attribute of thought, and nature as an extended thing being another substance under the attribute of extension. The odd thing about Spinoza's exposition in book 1 is that he doesn't actually mention the attributes of thought or extension at that stage. And in proposition 11, he goes on to prove by his ontological argument that God has infinitely many attributes without, of course, attempting to enumerate them. And the warrant for the infinity of attributes just seems to be the principle of plenitude. And he doesn't explain at all in the early part of book one that he's really concerned about the attributes of thought and extension, although it really is implicit in the metaphysics. So here he's now going to spell it out. So he's going to say that thought is an attribute of God, that extension is an attribute of God, that in God there is necessarily an idea both of his essence and of everything that necessarily follows from his essence. It's clear from the demonstration of these propositions that when he refers to God's idea here, this is just a synonym for the infinite intellect. Remember, this is the immediate mode under the attribute of thought from which all of the other modes in that attribute follow. In the Scholium to Proposition 3, he reprises this idea that God does not have free will, that God acts with the same necessity by which he understands himself. We've seen all this already in Book 1. God's idea, this is Proposition 4, God's idea from which infinitely many things follow in infinitely many modes must be unique. The proof just cites Proposition 14 in Book 1, which is the proof of the uniqueness of substance. Nothing new here. Propositions 5 and 6, rather than read them out, let me just paraphrase them here. The Proposition 5 states, in effect, that the idea of a singular thing is not caused by the thing, which is the object of the idea, but by God, considered as a thinking thing. So what Spinoza is saying in these two propositions is that reality can be viewed either under the attribute of thought or under the attribute of extension, but a complete account under the attribute of extension does not refer to the attribute of thought and vice versa. Okay, the modes of each attribute have God for their cause only insofar as he is considered under that attribute. Okay, we've already seen him state this in proposition 10 of book 1, okay, where he says in so many words that we either have to view God as a thinking thing or we view God as an extended thing. But he doesn't, at that stage in book 1, explain how to reconcile these two perspectives. And it's really left hanging at that stage. But here in proposition 7, he's going to give his answer to that question. Okay, the order and connection of ideas is the same as the order and connection of things. I should have highlighted that as well. Okay, so this is generally known as the doctrine of the parallelism of the attributes. He only offers a one-line proof. He simply cites the fourth axiom in Book 1, the idea of a thing depends on knowledge of the cause of which it is the effect. Okay, so you have a thing under the attribute of extension. The cause of the thing is an idea under the attribute of thought, and this relation of cause and effect for Spinoza, it's an isomorphism, which is the parallelism between the two attributes. So he just restates this in different ways in the corollary and in the scholium. The thinking substance and the extended substance are one and the same substance, which is now comprehended under this attribute, now under that. So a mode of extension and the idea of that mode are one and the same thing, expressed in two ways. So this is going to be his launch pad for his theory of the mind-body relation, which is going to be his answer to Cartesian mind-body dualism. Okay, this will be the subject matter of next week's meeting. He's going to tell us that the human mind is the idea in God's mind whose object is the human body. I just mentioned this will come up next week, that the modern iteration of this is the mind-brain identity theory in the theory of mind. Is that what it's called? Whatever branch of philosophy deals with this question of the nature of the mind. The mind-brain identity theory maintains that the mind and the brain are the same thing, viewed through different perspectives. Looked at from the first-person perspective, it's the mind. Looked at from a third-person perspective, it's a brain. So Spinoza is going to develop that in his own terms, starting from proposition 10, I believe, or 11. There's just one other proposition that I'll cover. It's a sort of commentary on proposition 7. Okay, so proposition 7 says that the order and connection of ideas is the same as the order and connection of things. And that raises the question, what is the status of ideas that refer to things that do not exist, or specifically to things that come into existence and go out of existence, such as human beings. Spinoza uses the term formal essence to refer to the essence of things whose existence is not necessary. And there's a sort of, I guess, theological problem that comes up here, because to say that the idea of, or the formal essence of a human being exists in the mind of God, for theologians, this means that since God is eternal, and for Platonic theology, there is no time in eternity. There is no when or before or after. There's a question of how do you get from this timeless, formless essence to the contingent existence in time of things such as ourselves, whose existence is locked into a particular time and place. The obvious answer here is, well, the formal essence of a particular thing should actually include a timestamp. Okay, and then there's no problem. But this doesn't work in medieval theology, and Spinoza is concerned to meet the theologians on their own ground. And eventually, we're going to have to delve into this because Spinoza's doctrine of the eternity of the mind, although he doesn't use the word immortality, is nonetheless couched in these traditional religious terms. So I mention this as, I'm just flagging this now as something we will eventually need to deal with in book 5, but need not be concerned with at present. Okay, where the main business will be to develop Spinoza's theory of the mind-body relation and his theory of knowledge. So that's all I want to cover for today.